We have Jed JohnHope. Can't say he's in a hot seat because he's handling it so well. With the illustrious Chalana Brown. Fight this boy in the comments. Daren the Beard Georges. You got your homeboy here, Richard Dorsey. And I'm going to kick it back to Chalana because her heart is in human development. She wants to see the VI be a beautiful place with beautiful people.
Yeah.
So, table is yours.
Yeah, I just want to talk about diversification because we talked about that. You ended our last segment on that, and so I said it to almost every candidate. I think about my grandchildren. I'm thinking forward as we know 75 more years and we're in the 22nd century. I mean, what do you see for the diversification of jobs and pipelines for our students to be able to get the jobs and be knowledgeable to make sure that we are on the forefront of globalization?
Well, obviously, everyone has shifted towards tech, right? But this ties into some of the economic discussion that we're having before. It's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? The schools and education system here needs to cater to the job and the workforce that they are going to realize upon graduation, right? And so we need the whales, we need some more whales. When Hess was here, they were a big part of the vocational school, right? There were millwright programs, there were carpentry programs, plumbing programs, and we need to figure out who those big employers are going to be that are employing our kids of the future and our kids of today, and get them here and figure out how we can help them get our workforce ready. So that's what I would like to do as governor, is I would like to partner with industry and start creating logical off-ramps from, say, probably the 10th grade into industry, right? So we know our kids are gonna end up in tourism. We know our kids are gonna end up in construction. We know some are gonna be entrepreneurs, some are gonna go to college, right? There's only a few sectors where our kids end up. On St. Croix, a lot of kids end up in manufacturing, right? So we need to start giving them practical training from probably about the 10th grade to help them prepare for those jobs. You shouldn't wait till you graduate from 12th grade with your diploma and say, all right, now I'm looking for a job. Now I gotta figure out what you wanna do. That needs to start a couple of years prior.
Arts and heritage as well.
Arts and heritage as well. I did. That's no slight to the arts and heritage community. I was just providing a few examples.
Okay, yeah. So what work have you done with our civic organizations to help propel some of your frameworks that you want to do, or conversations you've had with them that you see could be stronger, or you think that they're doing very well?
Yeah, well, I was on the board for CMC Arts for a long time in the art space and helped them with their programming. Helped George Cannon with his gun violence initiatives.
Films, yeah.
That was that's the way that came to be was kind of sad. It was after Jordan Dutty Hot Jones got killed. And I was trying to figure out how to make an impact and how to best serve my community. So we threw a concert, Heart of the Block, in Christiansted last summer. Had artists coming from all over the world. It was headlined by Egyptian and Mr. Easy and a few other folks. Got 5,000 people out to Christiansted. So I have devoted my time to helping get our young people engaged in positive activities.
Are you going to continue with that? Because I know that there's a lady named Miss Marilyn who does like a walk every year for young men who have succumbed to gun violence. You find that could be something that could be expanded towards all young men?
We would love to expand it. We are in the planning phases for the second version, HOTB2. And we've been working with sponsors, trying to line up the funding. It was an expensive arrangement, and it wasn't, it was not done solely with government funding. A lot of it I funded myself. Okay. So I'm trying, with the election going on, I'm trying to do that this year. So I'm trying to get some sponsors to help it and pitch out. But it's something we would like to do, and we have the artists lined up. We have the community interest. We would like to expand it into a Taste of St. Croix like week-long event where it's more than just the big concert. I mean, that could be the coup de grace, but for the rest of the week, we're engaged in the community, we're engaged in the young men and the young women, and trying to get to the root of this gun violence problem in the Virgin Islands.
Okay. Before I let the man loose, Daren.
I see waiting to jump in.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I want to touch on health and hospitals real quick, and I'll get her balance out at the time for this segment. We have an aging population. We have chronic diseases. Our health infrastructure is being overhauled to a degree. Like you mentioned, they tried to unify them. I see new buildings being built. What are your plans? First of all, what are your concerns about the current direction of our health infrastructure, and how will you kind of like navigate it going forward?
Well, I think the problem is the same as WAPA. We should not be trying to run a healthcare organization. So my goal there and plan there is to partner with someone in the States that has, 10 hospitals, 15, 20 hospitals, whatever it is, and be a part of their system. So, right now, I think there's 7 different healthcare organizations providing healthcare services in the territory. That's insane. For 85,000 people, we have 7 different organizations, 7 different boards, 7 different CEOs, although, they just merged the CEOs of Juan Louis and Schneider, right? But, it's crazy that Frederick said Healthcare has its own CEO, right? East End Medical Center has its own CEO. So there needs to be a lot of consolidation in that space. We can't continue. We can't continue the way it is.
Economics, go get them.
Well, you know what? I want to tie back to the hospital and the healthcare. I think one of those things our system is overburdened by unpaid for healthcare, right? And it is also overrun because of it, and we have the hospital being overrun. Do you see a scenario that on both St. Clair and St. Thomas, that, for example, could it be like a private hospital, right? So that we expand our care, so we're not overloading the hospitals. We could then offload some of it, rebuild it, and we could have separate care, because I think that's what we're missing, is because our residents are leaving the islands. So a lot of even with those who have insurance, they take their health care and they spend it someplace else. How can we now retain that for our economy?
Yeah, I don't see a separate private hospital being a reality, just because there's not enough of an available market for a government-funded hospital to compete with a private hospital. But the way to solve that would be to partner with a hospital in the States, preferably in Florida, to work out arrangements for whatever services that couldn't be done here. You whisk them up to the States.
Okay, let's talk about infrastructure for a little bit.
Sure.
I believe that the Virgin Islands is behind. Not behind just our U.S. counterparts, but in a lot of advanced places in the world, right? We're behind on telecommunications. We're behind infrastructure in our buildings. The way that we construct buildings, one of the conversations we had in a previous conversation about the housing crisis, the way that we build is also expensive and is also not efficient as well at the same time. What policies do you have in mind to deal with these infrastructure woes that we have?
Well, on the housing thing, we've got to look into more modular construction, right? So we got to look at prefab and see, I'm looking at building a house myself, and I am not looking at the traditional brick and mortar, setup, right? These things you can, their companies are pretty much, have Lego type houses that you can pop together. They're hurricane rated, and all it is pretty much assembly. You have to lay a foundation, but beyond that, you could be in the house in 60 days, right? Even in the Virgin Islands, maybe it's 90, maybe it's 120, but that's, if you're going to start a house from scratch here, it's going to take a lot longer than that, right? So we really have to push those initiatives. And I remember back when, Adrian, what was her name from St. Thomas, the former director of HUD, Adrian Todman, Director Todman. I spoke with her a lot, and she was telling me about all these fantastic programs that, she was championing when she was the head of HUD to get money into these prefab homes. They would come onto the National Mall and put up a house. They would have like a conference on the National Mall, and they'd put up a house in a matter of days, right? So the federal government is willing to fund these things, and we have to get innovative on how we do this. Like this whole brick and mortar thing, taking 2-3 years to build a house, we can't afford it anymore, and our people can't either.
And we don't have the labor force.
We don't, and that's the other.
Well, let's tie back in. So we did the housing, but let's talk about the other parts. Like I said, telecommunications, and also the way we construct our roads. What else can you do to adjust to? What policies can you enact to improve those areas?
Yeah, well, so the road thing, you're talking to an engineer here, right?
That's exactly why I wanted to ask that question.
Yeah.
The road thing is very specialized, right? So one of my friends from here, his name is Wayne Alec. Big up to Wayne. I know he'll watch this at some point. But Wayne, for example, worked at the lab in Florida where they decided what the specific mix of concrete or asphalt was, and they were testing constantly for those climate conditions in Florida, right? To my knowledge, there has been no such research done in the Virgin Islands, and we just take whatever the asphalt company or the cement company gives us to lay down on the road. But these things are highly specialized, right? So there needs to be some research done on, given our climate, given our humidity, given the type of precipitation and rainfall that we get, what is the best mix for our roads long term? That's never been done.
And don't forget telecommunications.
Telecom. Well, we're sitting on, right near here. We're sitting on some of the biggest bandwidth in the entire world. I also think that we need to get a partner in here to help us utilize that or maximize how we utilize this telecommunication resource.
Okay, let's get to the heart of the matter. The Virgin Islands in this administration has been rocked with many issues, scandals. The children them said turned into convictions. How do you start to restore public trust and confidence, first in the office of the governor and then in the commissioner's level?
Well, I think the first thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to put everything out in the open. There's an old adage that says sunlight is the best disinfectant. So I think that the only way to stop a lot of this from happening is making sure that all of the government's information on spending, all the expenditures, from credit card receipts to gas receipts to contracts, are online within 30 days. There's, if you wanted to figure out what was spent on the last trip, let's say someone took a conference and went to Hawaii on that conference, how would you figure that out? It's your money. You should know how your money was spent when these government officials were in Hawaii, right? We got to put it all online. The crazy thing is the legislature actually mandated back in 2010, I think it is, that we create a public portal. It was just never funded.
Another crazy thing is, because I worked in the legislature briefly, there are dozens of annual reports never submitted to the legislature that are actually mandated by law.
Correct.
So the ones that the data being hidden. Yeah.
Correct. So it's all accountability. And if we were to have a real portal where this information is really accessible to the people of the Virgin Islands, a lot of this strippiness would stop. I mean, I'm livid because I don't know if you guys saw the Brian Loudon expose on Carnival a few days ago, where, all of a sudden, we're funneling $7 million a year through a nonprofit for Carnival. That's our money. We should know how it's spent. And going back to Heart of the Block, after that concert, I published a public report where I told everybody, it cost us $150,000 thereabouts. This is how your money was spent. I don't have to get granular to the point where, Egyptian got this much, Pressure got this much. You don't have to go into that. You can say, I paid talent X amount, production costs were this, marketing was this, and give the public some sort of snapshot of how their money was spent. I'm beside myself that we can spend $7 million, through a non-bid public contract and hide this from the people of the Virgin Islands. It's your money. It's my money. It's our money. So this stuff has got to stop.
We're talking about contracts. I've come to understand that the Virgin Islands is a contracts paradise for people who don't live here. Between change orders and renegotiating until ODR has been hit with lawsuits by vendors who didn't get their fair share. Is there any active plan to adjust or to address some of these massive contracts, $100 million contracts, $200 million contracts, to look at them again and see if we're wasting?
What I would say is one of the first actions I want to take in office is put a 90-day pause on all contracts and go through and see if this stuff actually makes sense. We're rebuilding David Hamilton Jackson for $1.2 million per apartment. Does that make sense to you? This is low-income housing. We're better off giving everybody a $750,000 check and telling them go buy a house.
Go buy the land and the house.
Go buy the land and the house, right? You see a lot of strippiness going on. So we have to take a pause and say, does this really make sense? The largest contract in the history of WAPA is a contract for the solar fields, and that was not competitively bid. So it does us no good to continue to buy a Honda Accord for the price of a Lamborghini. It has got to stop.
That's a quote right there.
I'm gonna take that with me in life.
I don't know.
That was a good quote.
So we are officially on the bottom half of this half hour. Give us a preview of what your first 100 days should look like, and then I'd want to wrap that by asking, what are the metrics that you want the public to judge you by with your first 100 days?
Well, so I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, but the first thing I want to do is put a pause on all the contracts, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now that I'm not sure is in the best interest of the people of the Virgin Islands. And that's clear as day. So the next governor, whoever that person may be, needs to hit pause and review these contracts for worthiness, right? The second thing that we really need to do is we really need to get a handle on the affordability of this place. And one of the things that I would do to address that is I've got some classmates at Walmart. I'm jumping on a plane and I'm going to Bentonville, Arkansas, because watch, when you're working, you got to go where the people are that you need. We need a big box store here. For the majority of my life, we had 4 of the top 10 Kmarts in the world here in the Virgin Islands. It's a captive audience. You need a basketball. You gotta go to Kmart. You know what I mean? You need a pocket brief. You need bras. Where are you gonna go? There's no dignity in having to get that stuff on Amazon. So we need to replace those Kmart stores with a big box store. And there's been studies done that when Walmart enters an economy, the cost of living drops 49%.
That's a major drop.
Crazy, right? So I'm not saying that it's going to solve all our woes, but a little more competition would help, right? I know there's going to be detractors on this, but would you say that Home Depot has been a net positive or net negative for the economy?
That's a hard one because I know they made money after Irma and Maria, but I will say this, it did force our other hardware stores to check themselves, and we lost a couple in the way.
Yeah.
It's a competitive market, and no one should be above competition. But we need, our families are struggling, and we need to make the Virgin Islands more affordable. So if we can lower the price of groceries by 49%, that's something that as governor, that is my job to make sure that we can make that happen.
So let me ask this. We talk about affordability, so you open the door there. One of the biggest, I would say, economic depressants is our gross receipt tax system. I remember a former elected official say that it could be estimated that our actual effective tax rate is somewhere above 20%. So that's above any sales tax within the US. What can we do to address that? Because I think coupled with the fact that we're outside of the customs zone.
So you have to pay excise tax.
You have to pay excise tax. Then you're going to now put in for grocery receipts. And we are the consumers. We are at the bottom of all of that. So we're paying all those fees in the prices.
Yeah.
What policies would you enact to help reduce that cost to the everyday consumer?
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan. I've written on this several times that we need to get rid of the gross receipts tax and go to a straight sales tax. As you've pointed out, along the value chain, everybody pays a gross receipts tax. So now I'm paying you to pay your gross receipts tax, and the next person is paying for me to pay my gross receipts tax, and so on and so forth. And it just, by the time you add it up, it might be 20% depending on the good, right? So we need to go to a system that's fair and transparent. But I don't think you're going to win that battle right away. There are more pressing issues to lower the cost of living. And there are things like that I spoke of. Getting a Walmart in here would lower the cost of living a lot quicker than changing the gross receipts formula.
So I want to go to banking and insurance. Your lieutenant will basically be the head over it, but you're the boss in charge. One thing I've noticed in the Virgin Islands, there's this very distasteful thing where businesses charge you to use your credit card. They say you need to either spend $5, you need to spend $10, or I'm going to charge you 3%.
We all hate it.
Okay. Is there any space within your economic policy to start addressing that? Because I feel like, one, you're charging me based on the tender that I want to use. That's not fair. Two, Banco Popular, Oriental, First Bank, they own, for the most part, the majority of the credit card processing. But I've seen a shift. You see the Clovers, you've seen the Magic Pay. But the consumer at the end, if I don't want, I'm in a bakery, I want 2 titi bread, but I only have my card on me. I should not be forced to spend $10 for only $2 worth of goods or services. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I would say is, I think as an executive and as a manager, you kind of have to pick and choose your battles. I know that it's a nuisance to you, and I can certainly empathize with your, because I feel it as a consumer as well. It annoys me as well. And I guess from a policy perspective, I think that that's a way for folks to hide taxes, because obviously you're trying to motivate the consumer or incentivize the consumer to use cash, right? But to me, I would consider that relative calculus, and I'm trying to make sure we could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. There are a lot of other issues that we need to tackle first before we get into more nitty gritty things like that.
Okay.
You know, let's try to keep the power on first, and then I'll worry about the fees charged on the credit card
Okay.
machine.
So we're going to keep the power on. Governance. I'm sorry, not say governance. VIPD. I'll just leave that there. VIPD.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
drop that in the room.
They're
All right.
they're over budget all the time. They're overworked all the time. They're understaffed all the time. And then they still deal with the problems of governing and policing ourselves.
All right.
So you're asking my cousin to make sure I don't steal. You're asking my girlfriend to make sure I don't rob.
Right.
What are some of your ideas or your initiatives for VIPD and helping us to police ourselves in a more holistic way?
Well, I'm a big fan of VIPD. A lot of the officers have worked for me and my companies throughout the years. So we have a lot of great people. What I would say is it's the same thing. It's a leadership and management issue. And I've written about the police overtime issue several times. You know, we have police officers making
6 figures, easy.
close to 400 grand. The highest paid government employees are police officers. And there is a good bit of overtime abuse. So I think the way to solve that, overtime has to be approved, and it has to be approved by your supervisor 2 levels up. So it has to be, you know, your captain signing off on overtime. Not saying that you can't work overtime, but let's agree beforehand that what you're going to be doing for that time, right? And you know, a previous police commissioner was able to do that and cut $10 million off of the overtime bill. So it took it from 30 million to 20 million. So that's significant, right? Some of this is common sense kind of management controls to make sure that things don't get abused. But beyond that, you know, VIPD is going through some, you know, insane staff shortages. And what I would do is there are a lot of folks that are on the VIPD payroll that, you know, are out on medical leave or sick leave. You know, they need to come back to work, and we need to have a ready to serve evaluation, a fitness evaluation. If you're good enough to work at a desk, come back. There's something that you can do, but you know, there's not going to be any more sitting at home on a payroll, and then I gotta go find another officer to do that job that you could have done. You know, some folks are out legitimately, and that's fine. But the other folks need to come back to work and help because, you know, especially when we have these crime surges, we need everybody helping out. We need all hands on deck.
Lady Chalana, we have a little bit of time left. I'd like to give you the floor again.
Yeah, I would like to address you. I know that you had a media company, Yellow Cedar Media, correct? Yeah. So I know that you spend time on social media, and what I liked about social media is that whenever there's been sexual violence out in our community, which we saw an uptick from our hurricane in 2017, there was been have the capacity to have real-time conversations, and many people found that people were very lacked empathy when it comes to sexual violence reports on our social media, news media sites. And what do you think does that tell about who we are? And what kind of initiatives do you think or policies that we can strengthen to, one, make people accountable, but also develop more empathy?
Yeah, well, I think that starts at home and it starts in the schools. So we have to start, you know, funding programs, you know, through organizations like the Women's Coalition to get into the schools and help our kids understand, you know, what sexual violence is, what are the precursors, and how do we kind of alleviate and eradicate those problems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to touch on seniors before we wrap up because we got about 5 more minutes left. We have an aging population that's growing, so we're older in terms of our population. What are some of the issues that you see with our aging population, and then what are some of the remedies that you'll try to address?
Ooh, well,
So, Allah, we got grandmas and
yeah,
aunties and they get old.
yeah.
We do.
Well, transportation. You know, my mother, you know, when she was still here, she had very serious issues getting around. So we need to increase funding for mobility services for seniors. Unfortunately, I had a friend of mine whose mother was on the Meals on Wheels waiting list for years, and she actually passed before getting onto that program, right? So it's just simple brick and mortar stuff. Help our seniors get around, help them stay fed. Like, this isn't rocket science. I don't have an app that I'm gonna develop, you know, to help our seniors. But what I can tell you is that these are leadership and management problems. and we have enough food in this community to feed our seniors. So stuff like waiting for years to get onto the Meals and Wheels program will not happen.
So you said about leadership and management. Is there anything that you're going to implement specifically for like your commissioners, your executive directors, to keep them in line? Because
There will be KPIs on KPIs.
talk to me.
Yes.
KPIs on
Yeah,
everybody.
that's very exciting. Data. That's what we need.
Because
Data.
we've seen, I like to call it egonomics, the ego in our economic
Yeah.
decision, the political decisions. Talk to me about the KPIs and how you're going to keep the data focused on
Watch,
success.
I'm a classically trained manager, right? So I went to business school and learned how to run large organizations, right? What gets measured gets done. And at the end of the day, if you tell your commissioner of licensing, your metric is we need business licenses approved within 3 days or less. And for everyone that's not approved, I want to see the exception report, right? So every Monday or every other Monday, you come into Government House and you're going to have to explain to me why you got 60 businesses on your exception report. That's how things get done. Trust me. But beyond that department, every single department can be boiled down to a few key metrics, and you just have to monitor that and create a management system for when things don't always go right. But we're going to talk about it and trust me, it's painful when we have to talk about it.
And will that be something that you're going to be putting in your budget, your annual reports, press conferences? Hey,
I would like to see more annual reports. Every time I go to the States, I'm always, I was up visiting my brother in New Orleans not too long ago, and the sheriff sends out an annual report. There were so many robberies, so many this, and this is how we compared to last year. We need that information too here in the Virgin Islands. We need that by department. So yes, you will see more annual reports, but it starts with collecting the data, right? So once we have that data, we can make that data publicly accessible. But that's how you hold people accountable.
Awesome. Daren, you got a minute. Chalana, you got a minute before we wrap up.
So my question would be, my last question is, how would you work with the legislative branch, whoever is elected, because you're going to need them to pass the laws?
Absolutely.
And also, one of the things we've heard in a previous conversation with a Senator Villay, one is issues that the senators do not get the information on time. Sometimes they get the information the
Same
morning
day,
of
yeah.
or same day. How will you change that if elected governor?
Well, you just got to make sure that it's a collaborative arrangement, and obviously the more information you give them, the more in advance that you can inform your partners, the better decision or the better outcome you're going to get, right? So you see that with President Trump now. People are they're saying, well, you didn't ask us to get into this war, now you want our help with it, right? So I think if you could bring everybody to the table and say, hey, this is the problem we're trying to solve, here's the data packet, look through it and tell me what you think, right? And then, I know you got to vote on this, let's talk about it before you vote. But, I grew up around politics in the States, and, the governor's meeting with, the senators when he needs things, the mayor's meeting with the council, men and women frequently. So, those discussions happen before, something's on the table to vote on, right? Like, so you should have, every Tuesday, every Thursday, meeting with a senator for lunch. Just what are you working on? How can I help? What am I working on? How can you help me? And it's a give and take.
Chalana?
So I just want to be able to clarify more. So I know that one of the pertinent things for you is WAPA. Can you list me like 2 to 3 more initiatives within like the first 2 years, right, of you being a governor? If the community provides you with that stewardship, what are the other 2 things that are going to be pertinent for you?
WAPA, the economy, healthcare. Those are the top 3 things that I'll focus on. And I think we've touched on my approach to solving each of those. Day one, RFPs are going out for WAPA in the hospitals.
Okay. And what a little bit more with the restriction of healthcare. Can you just go a little tad bit again once
Just partner with somebody that's adept at providing healthcare services.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
like a multi-hospital organization.
Correct.
Because any hospital organization that we run in the territory will always be multi-hospital, because we need one in St. Thomas, we need one in St. Croix, and St. John.
And we shouldn't be running 7 different systems.
Yeah.
So we got to consolidate and get some help, get some expertise.
So I just want to say thank you to Jed JohnHope coming in, talking to the people of the Virgin Islands. Once again, the illustrious Chalana Brown, Daren the Beard Georges, Richard Dorsey. Jed, you want to say anything else before we go?
Yes, thank you guys for having me. Thank you for inviting me into your space, and thank you for putting me out there to your audience. And all I'll say is, I ask humbly that the people of the Virgin Islands listen and engage with all of the candidates throughout this season. And I know that things are bleak right now, but what I'll say is, don't let them take hope from you. Right? You can only believe in hope at this point, because I think things in the Virgin Islands have gotten so bad that everyone is looking for what's next. And please do your due diligence as you look at all of these candidates throughout the election season, and make sure that you vote your conscience.
There you go. Dialect 340, stay with us. We'll have more candidates coming up soon. Stay watching.